we were going back so many times, and the church was the Christian community within the country was beginning to grow. By now, I think it had grown to about 450, maybe 500 people. We saw another opportunity, and that was to help the Christian community start their own businesses, small businesses, so they could provide for their family, provide for their little local fellowship, a little church, and eventually start doing Kyrgyz to Kyrgyz mission work. That was our dream. And we did this, and it was so stark. It was no great revelation. The unemployment rate in Kyrgyzstan during this period of time was about 70%. The government would say 30%, but I've never believed government statistics at home or in a former Soviet country. So they said 30, but it was really about 70, which meant, again, think about it. 7 out of 10 people you would be on the street had no employment. And they were living in this just terrible, terrible economic situation. And the country was degrading very rapidly. Well, in the Christian community, we found that the number was more like 90%, which meant that in a small gathering of, say, 10 believers, only one of them would have a job. And so we recognized that while the church was fiercely loyal to Christ, and they were passionately in love with Christ and bold in their witness for Christ, they were slowly starving to death. And the church, although statistically, the percent had grown, from 100 or so to about 500, and now it was about 900. That statistically is amazing, but still, in a country of 5 million Muslims, this sort of dispersed population of roughly 1,000 Christians isn't going anywhere. The church had sort of slowed down its growth. People trying to figure out what's going on. A group of undercover missionary types came in, and they came up with the sort of standard reasons why is the church growth slowing, and they came up with things like, not a Bible in their language, the idea that there were not enough missionaries, kind of the standard list that you would expect, and then they added something to it, which just again kind of punched me in the head, and that was the unemployment, the poverty. And I know people say, well, yeah, it's okay to be poor as long as you're following Jesus. Yeah, that's true. But if you can't feed your family, or you're having to immigrate to Moscow to get a job so that your family back home in Kyrgyzstan, thousands of miles away, can survive, it's very difficult to raise your children for Christ. It's very difficult to think about disciple making. And so this was a major, major problem. Well, what we ended up doing to answer that question is a group of us got together and said, well, let's create an accelerator, an incubator to help people learn about business, to start their own little business. We'll provide a small loan to get them started, and we will see where that goes. Well, so here's what happened. We basically began to teach, and we had to go all the way back to the beginning. We had to teach a lesson. Business is a good thing from God. The Muslims were anti-business. The Kyrgyz people tribally were anti-business, but mostly it was the Soviet hangover. The shadow of Marxism and Marxist-Leninism had just perverted everybody's view of business and wealth creation, and what they developed was a brilliant system of reducing people to poverty. We had to undo that. So we had to begin to give a little bit of a theology of work in order to lay the foundation for why should you think about starting a business. Well, that took off like wildfire. It was so obvious that God was in that we began to go back many, many, many times a year to teach this 3-part, later 4-part incubator process to Kyrgyz believers so they could learn about business, they could create a business plan, they could receive some funding, they could start up, and they could be coached and mentored as they grew their business. Well, the church just exploded, and the word in the region exploded, and we were invited into Kazakhstan, we were invited into all the different parts of Central Asia. Other countries began to invite us in. I'm still working, by the way. I've never given up working. I've never gone full-time into that. But this is taking on a life of its own. My company hired somebody back in the United States to run it. It then expanded literally all over the world to 37 different countries, mostly Muslim, a few that were not, mostly unreached, even a smaller number that were not. And we had this wonderful thing that was known as the Joldos Project. Today, the organization that leads it is called International Microenterprise Development. And it still operates in 30 to 40 different countries, starting dozens and dozens and dozens of businesses every year. There are probably, I don't have an exact account today, but there are probably around 3,000 to 3,500 businesses run by believers, and all of them have an evangelical purpose. Every single one of them has a kingdom purpose. They wrote out, instead of a mission statement, they wrote out their kingdom purpose of how they were going to engage their business and their career in what God was doing around them, which, by the way, to me is part of what business's mission is really all about. So this began to take off, and we began to see people, just thriving churches were being planted. Roughly in the early days, about every other business that started resulted in a church plant, which led me to understand that missions isn't about planting churches. Missions is about making disciples. And when disciples, then what do they want to do after they begin to follow Jesus? They want to be together. What is a group of disciples called when they gather? It's called an ecclesia. It's called a gathering. It's called a church. And so church planting was not the purpose. Church planting was the fruit. It was the outcome of disciples obeying Jesus Christ as he told us to teach them in the Great Commission. So this are going to take off, and to this day, and this is now, today is the 2025. This was, 30 some odd years since the first visit to Kyrgyzstan. This concept of business as mission and business for the glory of God has really taken off. And it wasn't because, let me be clear, not because I did or we did. It started all about the same time in different parts of the world, China and India and Africa, as well as in Central Asia. This is something God was doing, and we were just swept up in it. We were just swept up in what he was doing in the world. But we now look some 30, 35 years later, and we begin to realize that this is a movement of God.